Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Naboles, your host, and we are here at Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty does work for you. And it is a delight, as always, to be back with you. I am very excited this week that we have my friend John Trudel, who will be joining us momentarily as we take care of some of our housekeeping little notes that we need to deal with at the moment, as well as some news here in the Ohio market for all of you that are listening to this and the podcasts out there. What's interesting to me is that my dad had a comment and from last week's program, and you know, when your dad talks to you, you gotta listen. And Dad said, you know what? I really didn't like the idea of you calling Governor DeWine DeSwine. Even though he is a, leftist Democrat instead of a Republican, you should be a little bit nicer to him and not call him a swine like that. I said, well, Dad, it was real easy, to be able to call him DeSwine because he's acting like, Then I had to think. I said, okay, Dad, you got it right. I am not going to insult pigs like that any longer. I won't call him a swine. But the fact is that he is dragging us all into the mud. And having raised pigs, I know that they're really, really clean animals, but it's just that image of all of this nonsense that he is bringing upon us and has done in the state of Ohio. But justice and reckoning has occurred, as many of us already know, here in the Ohio market, and we're seeing it across the country. And that which we're seeing is that on Wednesday, a judge here in Ohio, up in Lake County, out of Paynesville, a common pleas, he took and enjoined the governor and the director of the Department of Health, Amy Acton, and basically said that they cannot take and make up these ideas and impose or enforce penalties solely for noncompliance of the director's orders, especially against gymnasiums, health clubs, fitness centers, gyms, workout facilities, so on and so forth. It comes down to what we'll be talking about in the program with John as well, is who in the world do these people think they are, governors and these bureaucrats that just take and try and determine what is essential and non-essential when it comes to business, which is personal property, is guaranteed under the Constitution as a, that's a right to be able to do that. That is part of, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, that happiness portion in there. So I just wanted to kind of bring that out at the beginning here as we get ready to jump into what we're going to be talking about in the whole aspect of what's biowarfare, what's 4D warfare, what are those types of things. And with that, John, are you on the line with me?
I certainly am, Tom. Honored to be here, and thank you very much for your interest and attention, sir.
Oh, it's always a delight to have you, John. It's just, one of those fabulous moments when I get your time for sure. And, folks, John is one of those guys, if you haven't listened to the other programs that he's been on, he is an amazing techno-thriller writer. And quite predictive. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about is his ability to take and predict even what's going on from a number of years back. In one of your books, John, was that Soft Target that you kind of went through some of this stuff with?
Yeah, Soft Target was my book about bioweapons. It was a few years ago. Just recently won a gold medal for military writers, so it's getting attention again. I did a lot of research, which was kind of creepy. We'll talk about it later, perhaps. But bioweapons are definitely there. I don't agree with Bill Gates about very much these days. But one thing he said 5, 6, 7 years ago, I don't forget the exact year, that if we're going to lose millions of people in the coming years, it would be more likely to be because of bioweapons than because of nuclear weapons. And
Yeah.
I actually agree with that statement.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Mr. Gates is riding that horse, and he's invested in some very unusual things.
No, I agree. I think that if anybody does their homework on Bill Gates, and we've had some different interactions with him, and we know our friend Ben Peake has known the family for decades. And when you see what Billy Boy's doing, your point, he's invested, and the homework shows that he has direct ownership in a number of different things. I always said he had ownership in virus companies just so that he could make Microsoft, do its thing. So,
Right.
yeah, but so he's invested in a different type of virus company now, and this whole biotech industry that's exploded up there in that whole um, Washington market. I mean, you just go up north, up that way, and my goodness, that was a very interesting place where a number of those biotech firms started up in that as well. So yeah, let's talk about that, because I think here we are. Now, you just got back to Oregon, didn't you?
Yes, I haven't even counted the days. We're just now sorting things out. We've been back for about a week, and as we were traveling, everything was changing, and we still don't know what the rules are. I mean, as recently as this morning, we're finding things out. But it's an interesting time, and every piece of it was strange. I'm laughingly retired from high tech. I
Mm-hmm.
do novels, and in theory, I pretty much am quarantined all the time anyway, trying to get these books done. But we go down to Arizona several months late, but we want to see our friends down there. We're usually there in January. We did not make it until Friday the 13th, which in March, and we finally got down there Saturday, just in time for the whole state to shut down. And our community is like 70%. It's quite a few homes, but 70% of them are Canadians. And the Canadians were told they had to come right back or they wouldn't be allowed in. So we get there and everybody's packing up and leaving, and we're going, what's going on? And then the next day the whole bloody state shuts down, including the Grand Canyon. We couldn't go look at the Grand Canyon.
Oh my. And you and I have many mutual friends down there in that area, so it's I stay in definite contact with them, and it's just been amazing. And yet Arizona, and once again, just as I made in my housekeeping comments, Arizona has a Republican governor, and you have to wonder what has been going on. Just as before I go down that road with you, what we found out this week also was that Governor DeWine, in his 2019 budget proposal, had in there these absolute dictatorial uh, authority that he was expecting to receive that was buried within the budget, but the legislature found it. I mean, he wanted absolute control over all police departments, absolute control over all healthcare, absolute control over all taxing authority in every jurisdiction that was codified in the Ohio Revised Code. And you're going through this and going, hey, what did he know back in April of 2019? How about that one, John?
Yeah. One of the things I think that's interesting, because bad things have been happening, creepy things. In some ways, we're blessed.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back years, Gates and folks like that were talking about there was going to be a pandemic. Ochi, the doctor, I always pronounced his name wrong. A year and a half ago, he gave a speech there was going to be a pandemic, okay, and it was coming. And Gates said there was going to be one too. Isn't that interesting? And just thank God Hillary isn't president now.
Yes.
Because think how that would be the fundamental transformation of America if that had hit in a radical left presidency.
Oh, yeah.
And it could well have happened. I think in some ways we've been very fortunate.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, so we're kind of winding down a little bit here in the last about 3.5 minutes. And tell us a little bit how the biowarfare was part of soft target.
Yeah, well, it was an entirely different. The thing about my novels, they've all been predictive,
Mm-hmm.
but the future never unfolds exactly that way. So my bioweapon was different than this one,
Mm-hmm.
and that's to be expected. Um, but the thing that I learned when I was doing it, it's getting harder to do them because I get really deep diving into the research, and a lot of people tell me things. And this isn't something it isn't a treaty, it wasn't publicized. But the distinct impression I got at the time, and this is, I don't know, 6 years ago, I don't know, long time ago, was that both the Americans and the Russians had stockpiles of bioweapons.
Mm-hmm.
During the Cold War, we had nukes, we had all kinds of stuff. And the distinct impression I got was that both countries were very uncomfortable with that because we both had accidents, we both had embarrassments, and these things mutate, and there are diseases that were extinct back then. Now we're doing genetic modification, so it's even worse. Would get out of control, and there were accidents. Whole islands were made uninhabitable for years. And I think that very quietly, the Russians and we kind of came to the conclusion this stuff is not going to be of any particular advantage to us, and it's really frickin' dangerous. And we just kind of phased out, and both countries destroyed their stocks. Now, of course, China was not party to that.
Right. That's
Okay,
right.
so China rolls along, and I never even thought about it back then. China was relatively low tech back then. And so that's creepy. And so who filled the empty space without Russia and the U.S. there? Well, China definitely, although they're kind of botching it, and a whole bunch of private things.
Mm-hmm.
The World Health Organization, sure, China pretty much runs it. Well, Gates is invested in it too.
Mm-hmm.
And you do a vaccine. Well, a vaccine is kind of a benevolent bioweapon. So
Right.
where do you draw the line?
Exactly.
Weird stuff, creepy stuff.
Yeah. That's exactly to the point when, I always say that there's medicine is a God-given, knowledge base for mankind to utilize for good. But as you and I have discussed in the past, that, those things which can be good often turn into exactly what we're seeing. And I know some folks that worked on helping the Russians disassemble their bioweapons and their chemical weapons environments, especially after the fall of the so-called, reduction of the Communist Party, let's put it that way. And yeah, China has been eating our lunch over the last 20 years in so many different technologies, including our nuclear weapons and so on. As I remember working at the labs, and that was, we were doing projects there and helping them on a bunch of things. And that's when that one Chinese fellow up there in New Mexico in the high mountains got busted for walking out the door with some thumb drives. So, it gets to be an
Still going
interesting.
on. That's recent news. Now they're doing it with vials of viruses and stuff.
Yeah.
Professors, like at MIT and Harvard and places like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it comes down to when then as we wrap up these last 30 seconds here is that our founders understood the nefariousness that man could bring into governance and ways of taking a government apart. And part of what they were trying to preserve was that we would be a moral and virtuous people in such a manner that we would look at what is the good for the sovereigns of the nation. And so those are some of the things that, we're trying to understand right now. And as Sam Adams absolutely knew, and those anti-federalists got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And, I'm just really glad that you are here at Liberty Works Radio Network with me, where, as I said in the first segment, Liberty does work for you. And one of the things that I just want you to do is, as I always ask you at this time, go out there, take a look at what's happening on the site. Look at all the other hosts and hostesses. Look at all of the live programming every evening during the week, and always look for that button. Look for that donate button and hit that button, because this is a listener-funded network, and we really appreciate everything you do to help move us forward. And we're going to roll right back over with my friend John Trudel, and we're talking about our present situation. We talked a little bit about being thankful that we don't have Hillary in the White House right now because of, wow, the overreach that we're seeing, even with the likes of Republican governors, is like amazing. And the Democrat governors is even more so. And then what we've seen, and as John was explaining, who would have thunk that China would have been doing what they're doing? But my goodness, John, look, what's all, Wuhan, they were getting funded by the World Health Organization, and, Gates has got his bucks into it. And, we were talking about him. What's your thoughts on Wuhan and this aftermath?
One of the, a couple of things. One thing is, and this surprises people, I think it is entirely possible that this, obviously, it came out of China. It wasn't a bat fell in somebody's soup
Right.
or something like that. It was the Wuhan lab, which is their bioweapons lab, which is quite close to where the wet market is, and blah, blah, blah. So it definitely came from there, even though we're not allowed to say that anymore. It's racist if you say it's a China virus.
Right.
But the interesting thing to me, I have one very good source, and you'll see him. He's been aboard my books a couple of times, General Paul Vallely, pretty famous guy.
Right.
I used to be the head military analyst for Fox until the Obama administration, and he quit.
Right. Yeah.
But Paul is well connected, and what he believes and his network believes, he has a couple of companies and nonprofits and things. It was an accident. The Russians kind of bungled it. They had a level 4 bioweapons lab with maybe level 2 decontamination and stuff. So they'd been criticized for that in the past, and maybe somebody helped create it. But Paul actually came up with a document that was issued a few days after all this happened in Russia. It was very quiet with the Politburo for a week or two. They issued it, and they said, we're going to have to go to extreme procedures and shut down the lab, and it's been really sloppy, and maybe even some of our people have been selling the lab animals at the wet market, and who knows. And so that one order came out, and heads rolled, people disappeared. And I think that's real. That came out from their equivalent of the Politburo.
Right.
So I think that it was an accidental release, although maybe other parties, not officially connected to China, had their own agendas, because there are a lot of people invested in it, including some of the names that we've mentioned. Right. So, in any case, they were kind of embarrassed by the whole thing, and it goes on and on and on. But it wasn't just China. Yes, it almost certainly came out of that lab. And this information is so sophisticated now.
Yes.
They destroyed everything. Well, now they're saying, well, we had to. It was very dangerous, and we were leaking it out of the lab, and we didn't have good security. Well, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they destroyed it. We'll never get back to patient zero.
Correct.
But if you put it in a novel, this would be the perfect bioweapon. It's a very unusual disease. It is extremely, extremely unusually contagious, but very much non-lethal. Okay.
Correct.
So if you were designing a weapon to disrupt rather than to kill, this would be nearly a perfect weapon. And this disinformation campaign that it's racist or whatever to mention that it came out of China, whether or not the Chinese did it deliberately, it did come out of China.
Yes.
And there were a lot of private interests and non-government organizations messing around with that lab and even funding them, including Mr. Gates. So who knows? In any case, it is here now, and it's a heck of a mess. And we're dealing with it. Well, actually, some factions are exploiting it. And we're seeing kind of a test run for tyranny, and it's pretty scary.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that really interested me, and in respect to what you were saying about the perfect weapon for disruption, is number one, what we've seen because of the way that it has been, as you know, from the disinformation warfare and is continuing, that the economy got shut down. But the one that struck me the most was that we had a skipper on an aircraft carrier take and freak out. And, just like, wait a minute, yeah, people are going to get the severe flu, but you got a lot of young bucks and, does out there on that ship, and their recovery capacity is a lot higher. But when you take and you have a senior commander take and act the way that he did, he disabled, one of the greatest fighting machines in the world by forcing his crew to go ashore because, they can't handle the flu. I'm sorry, man. I've been in places, I've been on ships where, we had the squirts pretty bad from Pharaoh's Revenge. And guess what you did? You run out of toilet paper, you use napkins, and you start using T-shirts. So it's like, let's get over this and grow up and be people. But it disabled a nuclear carrier. Come on, John.
Oh, more than that, the whole task force, because the carrier was the center of it.
There you go.
In fact, it was publicized, which made it even worse.
Yeah.
I have mixed emotions about the whole thing. I was always a civilian, so I can't really credibly criticize that. But let's just say it. I think the captain had a sterling record, and I think he kind of screwed up on that one pretty badly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think, General Valley came out with that, same comment. He kind of, stood pretty tall for the guy based on his record and all of that. And, I respect that because I respect him, and, I've met him in the past as well, the general. But, it comes out to the point. His report was it was spot on. We saw that, and it's typical of third world nations. I mean, it was amazing as I got some feedback on what was happening in Russia, that there weren't more incidents that came out of Russia because, if you're looking at a level 4 and they're running, level 3, level 2, the propensity for something to occur is amazing. But I think that the communists in Russia ran a tighter ship than the communists in China. So
I think they really don't care that much about lives.
They don't.
The Chinese probably run the highest tally of deaths. They even beat Hitler and people like that. So they lose some population. They don't care.
Right. Right. Well, your experience in Southeast Asia and mine as well, and then from a global perspective, we see that that's part of a cultural aspect of things as much as it is from a totalitarian regime. But when we kind of ratchet this thing back a little bit, and we kind of inferred, we danced around it a little bit of these the objective of the radicals now, and we're thankful that Hillary wasn't there, and we're seeing that we're starting to open up, but yet we have governors that are still draconian, as you and I were talking prior to the call, and maybe a little bit in the first segment. Look at Oregon. My goodness gracious. You guys are like, wow, the whole left coast is really got those types of problems there. What's your thoughts?
We're basically, they're not Democrats anymore. They're socialists at best, and
Mm-hmm.
Marxists probably. And Governor Cade is right up there. The thing that is hard for Americans to deal with, I think, and this is like your dad's comment about slime, and I get similar comments.
Yeah.
Um, if you're on social media and you're an author,
Yeah.
Years ago, I just stopped. I mean, I just block people because I get all the talking points, barrages of them, and there's no point in debating it. They're just on message and bam, 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 just like fake news is. But the feelings in America are instincts. We're a very well kind, I guess, is we try to be respectful of each other, and we've always been highly diverse and highly divided. It was many nationalities and many backgrounds,
Yes.
but one culture.
Right.
And the culture was you would come together and you would negotiate with each other. And that is long gone. Now it is the left just wants to destroy their enemies, and they will do their best job of it. Look at General Flynn, for example.
Right.
Okay. They will totally destroy you if you don't agree with them. And, well, forget General Flynn. I mean, he was very knowledgeable. He knew all the intelligence community ins and outs,
right.
and yada, yada, yada. So he's a big threat to him. A person I know personally, we've done book signings together, Jerry Corsi.
Right.
His crime was writing books like I do, okay?
Yes.
Except in his case, he wrote nonfiction books. I have a little disclaimer at the front of mine. Even if it happens, I say, hey, I make all this stuff up, and I do.
Right.
Jerry does nonfiction. He got caught up in the Mueller thing, and it was the same kind of deal. He was going to go to prison for a very long time. They gave him a piece of paper, and they say, if you'll sign this and plead guilty to a felony, one count of lying to the FBI, it was a perjury trap, we'll leave you alone. Otherwise, we will destroy you.
Right.
And Jerry, all by himself, he thinks about that, and he says, I'm sorry, I am not going to sign a false statement and go before a judge and testify to it. Do your worst. And it turned out he lucked out and prevailed.
Yes.
And has written a detailed book about it called Silent No More. Every American should read that because it could happen to anybody. It could happen to me. It could happen to you. It happened to Martha Stewart, for example. Martha Comey was practicing on her.
Yep.
Because if you made any public statement a few years ago, or they have a recorded conversation, they say, well, what did you say 3 years ago, Mr. Trudel, about blah, blah, blah? And you say, oh, I said blah, blah, blah. They have the recording, okay? and so months later, there it is. You testified this, and this is what you actually said.
Right.
So it isn't a matter of lying. Americans are sympathetic. We're not supposed to lie. Basically, it's a memory test.
Correct.
And they did horrific things to Corsi, and people need to read that. I mean, they did the weirdest stuff I've ever heard of.
Yeah. And with that, we're down to our last minute and a half. But K.T. McFarland just came out with her new book as well, with her experience, which was very similar to Dr. Corsi's. In that the FBI knocks on their door, shows up. Oh, we want to have questions. She goes, should I have an attorney? Oh, no, we're just going to, have a conversation with you, kind of the Flynn thing. And then just started harassing her, to the extent that they'd wait outside on the street in front of her house until her husband would leave. And then, come knocking on her door in one entrance, grabbed all of her stuff, starts asking questions. I mean, the story. I think most people do, and, they can hear it out there in some of the interviews that she's done. But, this is something that the founders, and as I wrap up the last 45 seconds here in this segment, is that the founders warned about this. They warned about internal cabals, and they always tried to drive it home that we would be a people of integrity and know that government could subsume us. But one of the things that we've forgotten immensely is the fact that we as citizens are the sovereigns over our government. But we become so dependent as in my last article from de Tocqueville, we become so dependent on the government, we don't understand what that sovereignty is all about. But Sam Adams did, and he wrote about it regularly, as well as the Anti-Federalists. Come on back for the third segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they did. They got it right. And I want to welcome back into this segment, as we always do, all of those folks from, where is that? Soaring Eagle Radio. Yeah, I'm glad to be out there on Soaring Eagle Radio in Lima, Ohio, that added market that I really appreciate. And Dr. Mike Spalding and his wife Kathy, you guys do a fantastic job down there. So thanks a lot, and to all the listeners down there, sure do appreciate you guys all spending time to hear the words that come from Samuel Adams Returns. And with that, we're going to return to our conversation with my friend John Trudel. And we've been talking about that transition point of the left and how they've been using this, the disinformation. We just, while we were waiting on the break for the crashed economy, and how many small businesses are so affected by everything that's happening. And there's a number of articles out there that I've been posting on my site, and including in what we talked about at our mental health board meeting last night, was about what's happening around mental illness. We're seeing about that 50% of the people across the country are now calling into the hotlines because of mental illness problems, or people that are relapsing in their drug addictions because they can't take and get into group sessions and interact with other human beings. And so we're not only seeing the you know the crashing of the economy, but in a sense, the crashing of humanity, because we're social beings. John, I mean, to me, that's just phenomenal that those that can't maintain relationships and have different types of dependencies, or have no other forms of grounding, and have to, always turn outward for self-worth. Man, what a mess this has created.
Well, absolutely, and people are talking about that. And the main thing, and the Democrats have done this, they've divided us, well, the Democrats, the globalists, all those forces.
Right.
But it's not just that. I mean, another month of this total shutdown, we wouldn't have food. Okay.
Right.
Only the fact that people kept working through the shutdowns, and they would still stock shelves and things like that, kept us going.
Right.
But had that not happened, people would have been starving in the big cities, and maybe further out than that.
Yeah.
So we're so far very fortunate, but it's not over with yet.
Mm-hmm.
And the intent was to collapse us. And right now, we had this wonderful economy, the best in probably forever, certainly in the last 100 years because of Trump. Well, now that's gone. And
Right.
now we have to build it back. And we're wounded, all right? We are really wounded, and we're only partially able to function. And they're resisting that. We say, okay, well, this isn't an essential business. It's a church. This is a pot dispensary or an abortion mill or whatever. And they have politicized everything. And if you look at the pattern, the stuff that they're prioritizing is exactly the stuff that is most damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, add to that they want to, corrupt the voting mechanism. Is article I was reading the other day is that a doctor was making the comment that, it's ludicrous that, people are looking at potentially changing the mechanism by which we vote, when in reality, you can stand in line to go to Costco or to Walmart or wherever, or to the, pot place, or, whatever it is, but you can't stand in line to vote. And this whole thing on vote by mail, I mean, that just is amazing to me. What about you?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have the Big Brother book out too. One of the things on my blog, and by the way, I should have done that. My author's page is just my name,
Yes.
www.johntrudel.com, JOHNTRUDEL with one L.com. And there's a blog, same thing, blog.johntrudel.com. And one of the more popular threads there is about honest voting, okay, because the voter corruption has been going on forever and ever and ever. And I think the objective of this pandemic, number one, was to drive everybody into vote by mail, but also just to create fear and dissension and everything else. And people are more fearful than I've ever seen them. Anyway, so what I have on my blog, if you go for honest voting, just go to the blog and search for honest voting, you'll find a whole article. And once upon a time, as you know, I did this stuff for real. And I had a very prestigious industrial client, and we were dealing with the issue of trusted managed networks. They had some really sharp scientists. And one of the things I learned, even in theory, you can't make a networked system that is both verifiable and auditable. Okay, I mean, anonymous. It needs to be anonymous, and it needs to be able to be audited to be a voting system. That's not even theoretically possible.
Correct.
Of course, vote by mail is the worst, and that's what happened to Oregon. We went to vote by mail, and then motor voter and illegals get driver's licenses, and the state just turned socialist. Okay? And that happened 3-4 years ago. But anyway, so if anybody wants to look at that, yeah, that's just an invitation for corruption. And it turns out, surprisingly, there is a simple solution that works, and that's the Brazilians. Okay, they have the same kind of thing. They have a corrupt, cities and yada yada yada, in very remote areas. And what they came up with were these little voting machines that were portable. You could take it out in the jungle, in the Amazon, or wherever, run it from a car battery, and each machine would burn 3 chips, encrypted chips tracked to that machine, and also a paper record. So you would come back to a central facility, and you would tally the chips, and if there was a discrepancy, you had 2 backups, and if everything, you could go back to paper. And that would work, okay? And you could do all kinds of stuff. But what we're doing right now, vote by mail, is just an invitation to fraud. And using Soros voting machines is probably even worse.
Yes.
And what just happened in the election Tuesday that we had here in Oregon, national notice again, and it was just a primary. But it turned out that you couldn't register in the Republican primary. Okay, they changed they changed it all to Democrats. And they said, well, that's not true. People must not have checked the right box. Well, there are people who checked the right box 4 or 5 times and kept sending it in, and it still didn't work.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue in respect to, let's go from Brazil. Just the country north of Brazil is a place that I spent a good amount of time in, none other than Venezuela. And I think that's one of the things that happened in Venezuela in one of my first trips down there, and meeting with some of the patriots down there that I was meeting and working with. They're, going, Tom, when you see Jimmy Carter, you take and you rip off his ears, you tear out his tongue, you poke out his eyes, and I'm going, you cut off his nose, and I'm going, hey, what? And they speak this really unique, dialect of Spanish, so you're in there trying to listen, and then they're going, it's because of Jimmy Carter we got Chavez. He was the head of the UN voting team that came in here and validated the vote, and he's the one that made sure that Chavez got elected. And I'm going, oh, wow. People don't understand that. And now we're seeing things in the United States, but, I'm looking at your next book, John. And I took an oath to defend this country numerous times. And then when I went to the Board of Mental Health and Recovery Services here in my county, I had to take an oath to the Constitution, both of the United States and the state of Ohio. So breaking an oath, we're seeing that happen all across the board with our politicians and bureaucrats in particular that take an oath. But What in the world are you dealing with in your next book on Broken Oath?
Well, the interesting thing,
And we
most
got
people
5
say,
minutes left, John. I just want to let
five
give you.
minutes, I'll go fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the book has taken forever. It is not probably, it is certainly the invasion route. Many people are calling it. Venezuela is the new Syria,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's playing there. It's nasty.
Yes.
The Cubans hold the keys. They
Mm-hmm.
have something like 100,000 collectivos, which are basically thugs
Right.
that will beat you up or kill you or whatever. Every Venezuelan military outfit has a minder from Cuba and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So you have Cuba, then you have Venezuela, all the way up into Mexico. And you ask people, I do this often, what's the most dangerous place in the world, region, country? Most people say Middle East or something.
No.
Correct answer is Mexico.
Yes.
Okay. More beheadings than anywhere else in the world in Mexico. Venezuela is number 3. Of the top 10 cities, 9 of them are Mexican, and Caracas, Venezuela is number 3 on the list.
Yeah.
It was so bloody dangerous there that trying to do the research for this book was almost impossible. I bounced all over it. I looked at this place, that place, the other place. Meanwhile, friends of mine who do this stuff for real are doing the same thing.
Right.
Okay, where can we go?
Right.
And so it has taken me forever to get the book done.
Yeah.
I think it's turning out all right. I'm going to send you a early copy for you to make your own judgment early. So it's taken me 3 years to do this bloody book.
Yeah.
But I have high hopes for it. And what else can I say? The stuff that I found, even to me, it's harder and harder for me to be surprised. In this case, I'm not just surprised, I'm shocked. My God, all this stuff is going on with the cartels and the Cubans and the Chinese and the Russians, and now even the Iranians want to play there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there were a lot of training camps and that we were aware of, and especially as you move back and forth up around the Colombian border and all of that. That was definitely in areas around the lake, and then some of the other areas down south as you get down around Orinco and all of that, and in country. And it just was amazing to behold, and that was, my goodness, almost 15 years ago, and just the level of players that were coming in at that time. So correct, Cuba's been in there for a long period of time. A lot of different things were happening, and I really, well, the way I prefaced one of my essay with de Tocqueville was "Welcome to the United States of Venezuela," because if we take and we look at what we just talked about on mail-in voting, if we look at a lot of the bad actors and players from the various regimes that are out there, we look at all of the infusion of the different groups, jihadists, cartels, and all of that are not just at the borders, but within our borders and distributed through the United States. My goodness, I'm really surprised that the real key hasn't been turned on an operational basis within the context of the United States. So I give our law enforcement, I give our FBI great kudos for a lot of the internal stuff. Give me about 25, 30 seconds on your thoughts on that.
Well, short version, absolutely right. And the thing that was most astonishing to me about Venezuela, they were probably the highest standard of living in this hemisphere. They were free, they were happy, they were very prosperous. All of a sudden, gun control. Okay, 6 years later, they're starving. 2 years after that, they're running over them in streets with armored vehicle.
Yes.
So it falls apart that quickly, and it could happen here.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, somebody that I knew, and I had good friends in the oil ministry and all of that prior to Chavez, and then afterwards, and just what we saw so different. And I'm going to take these last 30 seconds and just wrap up, John. And it's been a delight having you on. As always, I look forward to taking a glance at Broken Oath. And, I look forward to it coming out to the general public as well. And I just want to thank you again for being on the program and knowing that, in such a manner, you're like the anti-federalist. And we know that Sam Adams and those anti-federalists, they predicted today, and they absolutely got it right.